We're in peak blackberry season, so today we're making a crumble. The filling for this one's made with wild blackberries, apples, pears and vanilla, and it's topped with a crunchy oat and almond crumble topping. This is a proper warming dessert and is best served when the weather starts to get colder. Plus it's really easy to make and goes great with homemade vanilla custard or ice cream. Here's how we make it. So we're going to make the crumble topping first so it has time to chill in the fridge. To do this we're going to add 140 grams of plain flour into a mixing bowl with 50 grams of ground almonds, half a teaspoon each of cinnamon and ginger and a pinch of sea salt. We're going to give this a whisk to combine, then add in 150 grams of cold unsalted butter that's been diced. Then the next step is to rub the butter into the flour with your fingertips until the mix resembles breadcrumbs. Once the butter's been rubbed in, it should look something like this. Next we're going to add in 70 grams of light brown sugar, 80 grams of Demerara sugar, 80 grams of porridge oats and 30 grams of flaked almonds. This gets mixed into the flour, then we're going to use our hands to squeeze the mix together to form small clumps. If there's any overly large pieces, just break them up with your fingers. Once your crumble topping looks like this, we can stick it in the fridge and let it chill whilst we make the filling. Before we do that though, we need to go and pick some blackberries. Now I'm lucky enough to live on a farm, which means there's always loads of blackberries to pick. But they are available to buy in some supermarkets and farmers markets. If you are picking your own, you want to go for blackberries that are firm and plump and are a uniform black colour all over. This way your blackberries will be perfectly ripe and will have the best flavour. It's best to avoid blackberries that are still a bit red or are overly soft. So for this crumble you'll need 500 grams of blackberries, and somehow I picked pretty much exactly the right amount. But before we can use them we need to give them a good wash. Here's how. So first we need to soak the berries for 5 minutes in a mix of 3 parts cold water and 1 part vinegar. You can use either apple cider vinegar or white wine vinegar. The acidity of the vinegar draws out any insects that might be on the berries. You don't need to measure out the vinegar, just make sure there's plenty in there. So once the blackberries have been soaking for 5 minutes, we're going to drain them through a colander and then fill the bowl back up with just cold water. Then we're going to add the berries back into the water, let them soak for 5 minutes and then repeat this process once more. And after the final soak, we're going to let the blackberries drain well through a colander before we use them. Anyway, now it's time to make the filling. So I'm going to add the juice of a lemon into a large saucepan, and we'll be adding the apples and pears into the juice as we prep them to stop them going brown. Speaking of which, I've got 600 grams of Braeburn apples and 600 grams of Conference Pears for the filling, as well as the 500 grams of blackberries that we picked earlier. So we're going to be cooking the apples and pears together first, and adding the blackberries in later on. Then to prep the apples and pears, we're just going to peel them, core them, and then cut them into 2 to 3 centimetre chunks. If you wanted your crumble to have softer, fluffier pieces of apple, you could use Bramley or Granny Smith's instead. I like to use Braeburns though because they hold their shape once cooked. So as you add the chunks of fruit into the pan, make sure to give them a stir so they get coated in the lemon juice. This just helps prevent the fruit from going brown. So once all our fruit's prepped, we're going to add in 40 grams of unsalted butter, 130 grams of caster sugar, a pinch of sea salt and a teaspoon of vanilla paste. Then we're going to set the pan over a medium-low heat and cook the fruit, stirring regularly until it starts to soften. This will take around 10 minutes. Whilst the fruit's cooking, we're going to add 25 grams of cornflour into a bowl and stir in enough cold water to make a thick paste. We'll be using this cornflour slurry to thicken up the filling. At this point, you also need to preheat an oven to 180 degrees Celsius or 356 degrees Fahrenheit. So once the fruit's soft, we're going to add in the blackberries. Then we're going to continue cooking the fruit for 1 to 2 minutes until everything turns red. This gives the blackberries a chance to release some of their juices. Then the next step is to stir in the cornflour slurry from earlier and then cook out for another couple of minutes to thicken up the juice. Make sure to stir the filling pretty much constantly. Then once the fruit looks like this, it's ready to go. So now it's time to assemble the crumble. So here I've got a 10-inch round baking dish that I've greased with butter, and I'm going to add the filling into this. Here I'm just making sure that all the fruit is evenly distributed. Then we're going to take the crumble topping out of the fridge and sprinkle it all over the fruit. You want to make sure that the crumble topping's in an even layer and that all the fruit is completely covered. Then we're going to bake the crumble in the preheated oven for 25 to 30 minutes until the topping is crisp and golden and the filling is bubbling around the edges. Then once cooked, it's just a case of spooning the crumble into bowls and then serving with ice cream, custard, or both. Any leftover crumble should be stored in the fridge and then reheated in the oven or in a microwave. You could also make the filling and topping up to 3 days in advance and store it separately in the fridge. Then you can assemble it just before baking, but add on a couple of extra minutes to the cook time. Anyway, that's how you make my blackberry, pear and apple crumble. The full recipe for this crumble and several more can be found on my blog saltbuttersmoke.com. If you want to have a go at making your own custard or ice cream, I've left links for both of those down below. And if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week for another recipe.